You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Hello and welcome. Again, I'm Lynn Friest, and this is episode 33. This is Working with Millennials, or our newer generations of our workforce. And this is part 2 in our series on finding your workforce and developing your new talent. So we've already talked a little bit about being a silver entrepreneur, but now we're going to talk about the new generation of our workforce and how we're going to connect with them, how we're going to help them onboard them, and those kinds of things. So how do we work with millennials? Most of what I'm going to be talking about comes from a book called Answering Why: Unleashing Passion, Purpose, and Performance in Younger Generations. The author is Mark C. Perna. Now, I've heard Mark Perna speak a couple different times, and he has worked with a local high school on his particular program that I'll be talking about as we go through here. It's a great program. It's really done some interesting stuff as far as engaging students and their parents in different careers, especially in manufacturing, but also other careers. In the course of doing this, he's had a couple of different career fairs that the school has hosted that have been just exceptional in helping students find out new ideas about what they might pursue. So some of the key points from the book that I'll talk about are, talking about how he views the skills gap, understanding the new generation, the reason he calls them the why generation, and what do we need to understand about that. He's got a phrase interesting. One of the gaps that he thinks might be with the new generation is, as he says, they don't hear the branch creaking, and I'll get into that later. And then finally, we'll talk a little about this awareness gap and then his construct called career trees, where he's describing a broad level of skills, a broad career path, but then talks about the various levels. You can have entry-level skills that don't require any more than a high school or a year or two or some just certification. Then there are the technical skills, and those are the things that require apprenticeships or 2-year college degrees or that level of skill. And then finally, there are the professional skills, and that's where we get to the 4-year program. But he has an interesting way of saying there are paths to all 3 of these, and each of them can be valuable depending on what a student wants to do and where, as he would put it, their passion lies. He also will talk about some things, he calls them professional skills. And it's interesting. He says, usually we talk about these in terms of the soft skills, but he says these are the skills that people just need to perform effectively, no matter what their education level is. It's how do you perform effectively in society and in work. And then finally, I'll kind of review at least a couple things since we're in manufacturing, review the welding tree and at least verbally describe to you about kind of how that works. So with that, we'll get started. So just in general, he begins by talking about the skills gap. And as manufacturing leaders, we pretty much all know what this is. 1, we can't find people. And 2, we certainly haven't got trained people always willing to work for us. The other thing is, in general, everybody feels that they need to go to college. And that's understandable. Parents want the best for their children. There's just a lot of, hey, you need to have a college degree to succeed in the world. Well, that's not exactly true. And he goes into something about that. In fact, he points to a different study where he says somebody who had looked at the overall jobs and stuff that have occurred over succeeding generations and even into the 2000s said, the mix of jobs is kind of you need 1 person with a master's degree, 2 people with bachelor's degrees, and then you need 7 people that are highly qualified in technical areas and going down to what I'll call entry-level jobs. So again, if everybody's just shooting for master's degrees and bachelor's degrees, there's a whole lot of other work available out there, and they're well-paying jobs too. I think we can all point that out as we work with manufacturing people. So some of this is just creating awareness. And he says, right now, sometimes college has become really a very expensive career exploration experience for our students. And, that's not a bad thing, but it is expensive. And so are there things that we could do, especially for students that haven't decided yet, things that could help them along without incurring that huge cost of spending all that time in college trying to figure it out? The other thing is, and again, as manufacturing leaders, you well know this, it's great to have the academic experience and academic degrees, but it's also very useful to have actual career experience, things where they've actually done something. And certainly as we hire people, it's more likely we've seen people with a wide variety of early careers, and we really look at those experiences as what can they carry forward into the work that we need to have done. And, in another sense, he says, education is not truly work experience. It's just education. So if we can have students get an opportunity to experience work early on in their educational journeys, that will help them decide what to do, but it also will help us evaluate, are they going to be a good fit for our organization? So now we get to the title of his book, The Why Generation. And a lot of that comes into the new generation of workers who always want to know the reason behind something. And it's not just because I told you, it's not just because that's the process we've done, those kinds of things. They really want to know the reason behind it. And actually, that's a natural thing for them to think because that's how we taught them. We taught them to always question things. And actually, in today's world, it's a really great quality because doing it the way we've always done it may not work as the environment around us changes and new things come up. So what's the purpose behind this process can be very useful. Another thing is, when we think of training new workers, again, we just think of training them to do a specific thing. We don't necessarily expect creativity when in fact that's what we want in the long run. We want them to not only know how to do a process, but also how to be creative when the need arises. It's kind of like in the Toyota system. They have great process discipline, but they also have built into how they do things, process innovation. So that's what we really want from our workers. But to do that, they need to know kind of the why behind things that are happening out there. Now, he goes on to say, and again, this is how the new generation is coming to it, and it comes from how we've expressed to them what we think they should be doing as parents or as adults. If in the past, the baby boomer generation lived to work, in today's world, the students and the new generation, they want to work to live. So they're really looking for lifestyle as much as they're looking for just a job to go to every day. So they may take different turns in the way they do things so that whether it be location, whether it be the work activity itself, whether it be the purpose of the organization, lifestyle is going to matter to them because they're really thinking about that. Again, that's how they were raised. That's how we would aspire for them to be. Mark Perna in his book uses examples where in the new generation, people are picking a job because of location, or they're maybe stepping away from a job to gain some new certification, or actually just do something different in terms of life skills. So they are not always just working for a paycheck. They're working to fulfill other needs in their lives. Another element, Mark Perna would say that the newer generation has, is for them, experience is everything. Now, again, you think of a welding job, is that an experience? But you think of what you're trying to do with your company. That can be truly an experience. Have you got creativity? Have you got new products? Have you got new challenges? Those are the kinds of things where that can fold into what the newer generation is looking for. But they also demand growth. They want to know that whatever they're doing for you is also contributing to their increasing skills and knowledge as a person. The other thing he mentions is that often they prefer group interactions. Again, they grew up in a whole educational system that valued group interactions. And to be honest, we as manufacturers, we truly want people to work in teams. So it's actually something we want, but sometimes we get hung up on, I'm just evaluating this person and their individual experiences and actions. But we really also want to know, are they doing something good or can they work well with groups? Mark Perna also illustrates an interesting example from UPS, and they were having problems with employee retention. Now, UPS is a very structured company. They have a lot of very good processes that help them be both efficient and be safe. But what they found is that traditionally they just taught their new employees in classroom settings and had them go through all these different processes and procedures and things like that. But they were having problems retaining people, and some of it was just this training kind of turned them off. So what they did is they created some experiential learning for these people. And they actually had the package truck. They had something there and it had sensors. So as they asked new employees to execute literally loading packages onto the truck or off the truck, and there was a way to go about that so that it was both efficient and safe, they had sensors that would actually let the person know that, okay, you did this way, but you know what? Over time, that's going to have a negative impact because you are not lifting correctly, or you're doing something that may not be in your best interest long run. The other thing he finally talks about is the whole issue about loyalty. And I think, again, as manufacturing leaders and people in business, we know that loyalty is maybe different now than it was before. It used to be you went to work for a company, you stayed with them for most of your career, if at all possible, and they, quote, took care of you. Well, in today's world, employment is simply more fluid, and it's probably more useful to think of these things. A guy that helped found LinkedIn, he had a book that's talked about tours of duty. Well, we can't just think that because we bring somebody into our organization, they're going to be here forever. But they will stick with us a lot longer if we're helping them grow and helping them get better at what they're doing. So it's one of those things, loyalty is a little different now than it used to be. Maybe they don't give us the loyalty that we gave our companies, but then again, we as companies, we all view employment as much more fluid than we used to. The next thing that Mark talks about in his book is this generation doesn't always hear the branch creaking. His obvious metaphor for that is, as kids, we climbed trees and we knew that if we were standing on a branch somewhere that might be giving way, you could hear it creak. Well, in some cases, we have given so much support to young people and the newer generation that they haven't had that experience of failure or learning to perceive when things aren't going right, or the fact that there are consequences when you haven't done something right. So it's a piece where we in the workplace, we can't just say, oh, they're entitled, they have too much self-esteem or too little maybe, but we have to really pay attention to those things. And then finally, he talks about, obviously, the whole helicopter parent thing. Well, that provides great support for children, students, but in the workplace, they really need to learn to be self-sufficient, make their mistakes, grow from them, and move on. And then the final thing he says in this area of his book is failure is a great opportunity to learn, and they really have to start looking at what's the light at the end of the tunnel for them. What are they really trying to be or do or accomplish so that they have some passion around what they're doing and aren't just going through rote processes or just coming to work and putting in the day. We want their light at the end of their tunnel. We want them to become self-reliant and independent, whether it's be as parents or truly that's what we want with our employees also. And how do we help them develop the want to? Because that's what will carry them through learning the how-to of anything. And again, we have to be supportive as employers to really look at that. Have they got a want to in our business and working for us so that we can help them go through the time of learning how to? There's another story that he kind of alludes to that I've often used too is, and we think of ourselves, but we think of our new employees. Do you have a job? Do you have a career? Or do you have a mission? And the old analogy for that is ask three people working in masonry. And the first person said, I just lay bricks. I come here for 10 hours a day and lay bricks. The second person said, well, I'm a mason. I take pride in the work that I do. I am proud to be a mason and I want to be the very best mason that I can. And the third person replied, well, I'm here to build a cathedral. I'm here to build something that lasts beyond me. So again, those are the kind of things is we need to help not only ourselves, but our new generation of employees find out what cathedral are they building. And then to kind of wrap this all up, what Mark Perna describes is what he calls career trees. And these are broad statements of careers like manufacturing or even the arts or sciences or different things. And he talks about the three levels. And again, I mentioned them earlier. There's the entry level that you can get at with the minimum levels of education where you can just really get started, but learn a little bit about what that career is. The technical, where it's more in the range of 2-year associate degrees or apprenticeships. And then the professional, where you're actually getting a 4-year degree in some activity or even the master's or doctorate degree. Now, he also says, though, there's the roots, and this is where it gets back to where the students are today in middle school and even high school. So academics are a fundamental foundation. They need to have that. And then he goes on to say another root is these professional skills or the soft skills. How do you work with people? How do you understand yourself, understand others? Then there's experiences. Are there ways that we can provide students with earlier experiences in some of these fields that they might be interested in, or at least help them do career exploration earlier in life than maybe they have recently? And then finally, igniting passion. What's the driving force between what these new employees or the new generation wants, and how can we help ignite that? Now, as Mark talks about these career trees, I'll give you just an example, and I will refer you to his book for a more complete explanation, or to his website where he's got some wonderful descriptions. But just for those of us in manufacturing, the broad idea of welding. What are the different levels at which students could be involved in the area of welding? And it starts with just simple sheet metal manufacturing and welding in shops, or equipment repair and welding. Welding that you could go out and do with a minimal amount of training and become successful, but it has limited potential for earnings. Then you would move to those technical careers. And there he starts saying, well, here there are roles like a custom motorsports fabricator, or a structural welder, or onboard ship maintenance welding, pipe fitters. But then you can also start getting into being a welding instructor, a welding sales rep, a welding machine operator, and even a project manager or foreman in a welding operation. All of those can be done with the 2-year of the technical degrees. And then finally, as you get into the professional arena, you could still be relatively in the technical degrees. You can be the underwater welder or the robotic welding specialist. You could be the material and weld engineer if you got the engineering degree. You could be working on, industrial oil rigs, an oil rig welder. Those, again, high-paying careers, and sometimes it needs higher levels of education. And you can also start your own fabrication shop at that point and work in the aircraft industry. So again, you can see how these different jobs at different skill levels are all possible just with the idea of somebody is intrigued with the idea of welding and manufacturing. Mark had a great example of a young woman actually from our area, and I heard him talk about her and I got to meet her. But she had an interest to be in manufacturing. She thought that would be an intriguing career. So she went out, went to the local community college, got a welding certificate, went to work for a large company as a welder, frontline welder. Then, after a year of that, she became eligible for tuition aid from the company. She went on and now got her business degree and is now working as a supply management specialist. So she works on acquiring material. So again, she started, and at the end of all this, it took a couple of years, but she ends up with zero debt, and she's got a great job. She earned great money as she went along. So it's just a great example of what's possible. She's not stuck being the welder that she started out at. She's now working as a supply management planner and specialist. So these are the things that are possible to help happen. So the next steps are up to you as to what you want to do. Again, I highly recommend getting the book, Mark Perna, Answering Why, Unleashing Passion, Purpose, and Performance in Young Generations. And also in the notes, there's the link to his website where you can hear more about it. The next steps after that is I recommend you connect with your local educational institutions. Who out there is probably doing some training that would at least align with what you think you need with your future workforce. Also, you can certainly connect with local industry groups or your Chamber of Commerce. There may be groups that are actually working on how do we, in general, develop the workforce and how to maybe we develop the specific workforce that would be helpful in our industry. So that wraps up this episode. Be sure to download the notes for this session and the handouts that go with this. Again, highly recommend the resources that will be linked in the show notes and on my website. In the next series, I'm going to actually be talking about an example of one of these apprenticeship programs for CNC workers, an example that we have at our local high school, but it illustrates a wonderful example of that. So I'd always love to have you share a comment or a rating or drop me a line if this sparks your thinking. So thanks for listening.